Welcome to Quick Speak the English podcast.
Hello.
In this deep dive, we're going to explore a topic that, well, it seems to be coming up more and more in the world of work.
That's right. We're taking a closer look today at something called burnout, and specifically how it connects to, the history and the challenges of the standard 9 to 5 work schedule.
Okay. So our goal today is to help you really understand what burnout actually means, maybe where this idea of the 9 to 5 day originally came from, and why these things feel so relevant and are affecting so many people right now.
Exactly. And just so you know, we'll be speaking slowly and clearly throughout. The idea is to make sure these important concepts and the English words we use are easy for you to follow.
Great. Okay, let's jump right in then. Burnout. It's a word we hear a lot, but what is it exactly? Is there a formal definition?
Well, it got more official recognition back in 2019. An International Health Organization actually described it as a workplace phenomenon.
A workplace phenomenon. Okay, so something that happens specifically because of work, not just general life stress.
Precisely. They were quite careful not to classify it as, say, a medical disease. But recognizing it like this really highlights how important it is. It's a serious issue that comes from the work environment.
Right, something that needs prevention, needs study.
Exactly.
So if it's a workplace phenomenon, how do they define it? What does it look like?
Well, the core definition is that it's a result of chronic work stress. Specifically stress that hasn't been successfully managed over time.
Chronic stress.
Oh.
So you mean stress that just keeps going on and on, not just a temporary thing?
Yes, precisely. It's not about feeling stressed for a day or two. It's that prolonged, ongoing exposure to work-related pressures. And this idea is usually broken down into 3 main parts or dimensions.
3 dimensions. Okay, that sounds helpful for understanding it. What are they?
So the first one is a feeling of extreme tiredness, like having very little energy left. It's often called emotional exhaustion.
Emotional exhaustion?
Right.
Like your mental and emotional fuel tank is just empty.
Completely empty, yeah. Feeling totally drained. Then the second part is about feeling distant, maybe even a bit cynical about your job and about the people you work with too. This is sometimes called depersonalization or emotional distance.
Feeling disconnected from the work itself and your colleagues. That sounds really tough.
It really is. And the third dimension, that's a feeling of being less effective, less capable at your job than you used to feel. This is known as reduced professional effectiveness.
Reduced effectiveness. So you feel like you're just not performing as well, not doing your job like you used to.
Exactly. So those 3 things, the exhaustion, the distance or cynicism, and feeling less effective, those are the core components. They're what researchers often use in studies and tools to actually measure and understand burnout.
Okay, that paints a very clear picture.
Yeah.
Exhaustion, distance, and lower effectiveness.
Got it. Now let's switch gears a bit. The 9 to 5 workday feels so standard, but where did it actually come from? It's funny, it feels standard now, but the idea of working 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. actually has quite deep historical roots. It really started to take shape around the late 1800s and early 1900s.
Wow, over a century ago. Was there a specific reason it emerged back then?
Oh, absolutely. It was a direct response to the really harsh working conditions during the Industrial Revolution. You had workers being forced to work incredibly long hours.
Right, I've heard about that, like 12, 14, even 16 hours a day in factories.
Exactly. Really difficult, often dangerous conditions. So naturally, worker movements started to form. They began organizing and fighting for better conditions, and a key part of that was limiting working time.
Makes sense.
Their slogan became quite famous: 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, and 8 hours for personal life.
8, 8, and 8. That sounds like a much more balanced approach to a day.
It was aiming for that balance, yeah. Trying to stop the extreme overwork and just improve people's basic living standards.
Yeah.
And then, after World War II, this idea really solidified. Many developed countries made the 40-hour work week a legal standard.
Oh, so it went from a movement's goal to actual law.
Yes, it became the norm, often structured as that 9 to 5 we know. And for a long time, it did provide a sense of stability, predictability for many workers.
Sure.
But, well, times have changed. Technology, computers, remote work. Now that fixed 9 to 5 structure can feel quite restrictive, maybe not so well suited to modern life anymore, which of course brings us back towards burnout.
Right, connecting the two. So thinking psychologically, why does that chronic work stress actually lead to burnout? What's happening in our minds and bodies?
Well, you can think of burnout as kind of the end point of being exposed to stress for too long. Our bodies have a natural stress response, right? The fight or flight thing.
Yeah, the fight or runaway mode.
Yeah.
Useful for short bursts of danger.
Exactly. Great for short-term threats. And initially, when you face work challenges, you might even feel energized, motivated by that stress response. But the problem comes when those stressors don't go away. When it's day after day, week after week, without enough breaks or recovery, your body just stays in that heightened, alert state. That's when the stress becomes chronic.
And that chronic state just wears you down eventually.
Precisely. Some key psychological reasons this happens include not getting enough chance to recover or rest properly, feeling constantly overwhelmed by your tasks, and importantly, feeling like your work doesn't have real meaning or purpose for you.
Okay.
So when your stress system is always on, even at a low level, it starts to impair things. It makes it harder to think clearly, harder to manage your emotions, harder to recover effectively. And this chronic drain really fuels that exhaustion and that emotional distance we talked about.
So your body gets sort of stuck in this emergency mode, and it just can't bounce back properly.
Okay.
How common is this problem today? Is burnout affecting a lot of people?
Sadly, yes. It seems to be affecting more and more workers all around the world. There was a recent report that really highlighted how widespread it is.
Oh, yeah. What did the report find?
Well, it found that a really significant percentage of workers globally reported experiencing symptoms of burnout. I think the figure was around 42% in 2023.
42%? Wow,
Yeah.
that's nearly half the global workforce feeling burnt out.
It's a huge number, and the report mentioned this was actually the highest level they'd seen since they started tracking this specific data. And interestingly, during times of major upheaval, like the recent global health crises, that number shot up even higher, sometimes reaching 66%. It really shows how external pressures can pile onto work stress.
That jump during crises really underlines it.
Yeah.
Are some jobs more prone to this than others?
Yes, definitely. The risk isn't spread evenly. For example, data consistently shows high rates in professions like healthcare.
Doctors, nurses.
Exactly. In one country, I think it was around 45% of doctors reported burnout symptoms in 2023. Now, that number was actually down a bit from previous years, but it's still significantly higher than the average across all jobs.
Jobs involving a lot of care, high responsibility.
Yeah,
They seem riskier.
that's right. Those roles and also fields like, say, information technology, fast-paced, high-demand jobs, they often carry a higher risk. It's partly due to things like intense deadlines, the sheer weight of responsibility, and also, increasingly, those fuzzy lines between work and personal life.
Right, those blurred lines. That seems like a really key issue, especially when you think about the traditional 9-to-5 model trying to operate in today's world. What are the main problems people see with that fixed structure now?
Well, one of the big ones is that having very rigid, fixed work hours often creates this constant feeling that you just don't have enough time for your life outside of work. Some people call this time poverty.
Time poverty. Like, you might be okay financially, but you feel poor when it comes to actual free time.
Exactly that. And the structure itself can mean work piles up, or you end up needing to finish things outside those standard hours anyway, especially if tasks don't just neatly stop at 5 p.m.
Yeah, work doesn't always fit neatly into an 8-hour box, does it?
Not at all. So that leads to overload, work spilling into evenings, weekends. And this conflict between work and life, it affects different groups in different ways too. Studies often point to women facing what's called a double burden.
A double burden. What does that mean?
It refers to the reality where many women juggle both their paid job and still carry a much larger share of the household chores and family care responsibilities compared to men.
So paid work plus unpaid work at home.
Exactly. So their total workload is significantly higher, which naturally increases their risk of burnout.
That really highlights how it's not just about the hours at work, but how those hours crash into everything else in life.
Absolutely. So the core problem isn't just the 9-to-5 schedule itself, maybe, but the underlying expectation that often comes with it, that employees should be constantly available, fully committed, almost prioritizing work above all else.
And I guess technology makes that expectation of being always available even harder to push back against, right?
Oh, definitely. Digital tools, smartphones, constant connectivity. They've really blurred that line between your professional life and your private life. This has led to what some call an always-on work culture.
An always-on culture. Like, you can never really switch off from work.
Pretty much. Think about getting work emails or team messages pinging on your personal phone late at night or on weekends.
Yeah, that happens a lot.
And each time it happens, it kind of chips away at your real downtime, your recovery time. It makes it hard to mentally disconnect.
I think almost everyone can relate to that feeling these days.
And there's another related idea called digital presenteeism. Have you heard of that?
Digital presenteeism. No,
Yeah.
what's that?
It's this pressure some people feel to basically appear to be online and available all the time, you know, keeping their status greed on messaging apps, responding instantly, even if they're not actively working on something critical at that moment.
Why do people feel they need to do that? Just to look busy?
It's often tied to anxieties, maybe about job security, or worrying that if they're not seen as constantly on, it might affect the performance reviews or chances for promotion. It's about the perception of commitment.
Ah, okay. It's about appearing committed, even if it means just being logged in.
Yes. And the thing is, that constant stream of notifications, those little pings from work apps on your phone, they can actually keep your body's stress systems slightly activated all day, even into the evening. And over time, this low-level chronic activation contributes to fatigue and makes you less effective.
Wow, so even just the phone buzzing with a work notification triggers a tiny stress reaction again and again. That's a really powerful point. So what can companies actually do about all this?
Well, it's interesting. Companies are spending a lot of money, billions globally, on employee well-being programs. Things like gym memberships, mindfulness apps, stress workshops.
Right, those perks and programs.
Yeah. But despite all that investment, overall stress levels and burnout rates haven't necessarily gone down significantly.
So just offering programs isn't the whole answer. It's not fixing the root cause.
Research strongly suggests that while those programs can be helpful, what really makes the biggest difference is the quality of management. It's about the support employees get from their direct boss, their team leader.
Really? Your relationship with your manager is that crucial.
Hugely important. Studies show pretty clearly that things like lack of support from your manager, having unclear goals or expectations, and feeling like you're being excessively monitored or micromanaged, those things significantly increase burnout risk.
Okay.
But on the flip side, managers who show genuine care and understanding, who provide flexibility where possible, and who set clear, achievable goals, that kind of leadership helps build resilience in teams and really reduces that chronic stress.
So it comes down more to the actual workplace culture and the day-to-day leadership, rather than just standalone programs. How does the bigger picture, like our wider culture and society, play into this?
Oh, culture plays a massive role. Societal values and expectations about work heavily influence how burnout is viewed and how much pressure people feel. For example, in cultures where your job success is really, really deeply tied to your social status and your sense of self-worth.
Like your job defines who you are.
Exactly. In those places, there can be incredibly intense pressure to work extremely long hours to show absolute loyalty to your company, sometimes above everything else.
And that intense pressure can lead to really serious problems, I imagine.
Yes, tragically so. In some parts of the world, this extreme work culture has been linked to severe health problems and even, sadly, a phenomenon where deaths are directly attributed to overwork.
Wow. Death from overwork. That's incredibly sobering.
It is. And recognizing these extreme outcomes is actually starting to drive some changes. We're seeing some countries begin to implement laws specifically aimed at helping workers disconnect.
Laws about disconnecting, like legally protecting downtime.
Yes. A good example is a law in Australia. They call it the right to disconnect. It basically gives workers the legal right to ignore work-related calls or messages outside of their agreed working hours, unless it's a genuine emergency situation.
The right to disconnect. That sounds like a direct answer to that always-on culture we were just talking about.
It absolutely is. And this idea, this legislation, is sparking really important conversations in other countries, too, about how we can legally and culturally create a healthier balance between work and the rest of life.
Okay, so it seems like there's movement happening, both from individuals wanting change and maybe some organizations and governments starting to respond. What can people do personally, and what can companies do to actually prevent or manage burnout better?
Well, on an individual level, focusing on recovery strategies is really key. Even simple things can help, like practicing mindfulness exercises, taking regular short breaks during the workday. You know, like the Pomodoro technique, where you work intensely, then take a short break.
Right, breaking up the workday.
Yeah, or even just simple breathing exercises. These things can help interrupt cycles of stress building up. And perhaps most importantly, consciously setting clear boundaries.
Boundaries between work and life.
Yes. Having defined times when you are working, and equally defined times when you are resting and recovering, and actually using your vacation time, not letting it pile up unused, really protecting that time off.
Actively creating that separation. Okay. And what about on the company side? What can organizations do?
A big one is exploring and offering genuinely flexible work arrangements. The research here is pretty compelling. Employees who feel satisfied with the flexibility they have at work show a significantly lower risk of experiencing burnout.
How much lower? This is a big difference.
It can be quite substantial. Some studies suggest that having that positive experience with work flexibility can reduce the odds of burnout by as much as 43%.
Wow, 43%. That's a huge impact. What kind of flexible options are showing promise?
Well, things like experimenting with a 4-day work week, for instance, or adopting hybrid models where people split time between home and the office. These approaches give workers more control over their schedule and can make it easier to fit work around personal needs and responsibilities.
Those definitely sound like steps in a different direction from the rigid 9 to 5. So looking ahead then, with all these pressures and changes, what might the future of work actually start to look like?
Well, I think the challenges of burnout, the limitations of that old 9 to 5 model, especially with technology and changing societal expectations, it's all forcing a much broader conversation about how we even define work.
It's not just about the hours you clock in or the tasks you complete anymore.
Exactly. There's more talk now about thinking of good work based on, say, 6 key elements. Things like meeting basic needs, having meaning in what you do, having control over your time, feeling cared for, maybe even having some fun, and having a suitable place to work.
Basic needs meaning time, care, fun, and place. That sounds like a much more holistic way of looking at work, more human-centered.
Very much so. It suggests that focusing on the employee's experience isn't just a nice thing to do, but actually essential for sustainable productivity and well-being in the long run. And we are seeing this start to translate into real-world experiments. Pilot programs for the 4-day week are happening in several countries. That right-to-switch-off legislation is being debated and implemented.
What are the early signs from things like the 4-day week trials? Are they working?
Well, the initial results often suggest that it can work. It seems possible to maintain or even boost productivity while significantly reducing stress and burnout. But, and this is important, success usually depends on companies genuinely rethinking how work gets done, changing their processes and culture, not just chopping off a day and expecting everything else to stay the same.
Right, so it requires real change, not just a shorter schedule. It sounds like the way we work really is starting to evolve, partly because the old model and its consequences, like burnout, just aren't sustainable for many people anymore.
That certainly seems to be the direction things are heading, yes.
Okay, so to sort of wrap up our deep dive today, we look at how burnout is a very real workplace issue. It stems from that chronic, unmanaged stress and shows up as exhaustion, feeling distant, and being less effective. And the traditional 9 to 5 structure, created for a different era, often struggles to fit with modern life, especially with technology making us feel always on.
Exactly. And we've talked about how tackling this needs action on both sides. Individuals can build recovery habits and set boundaries. But crucially, organizations need to step up, particularly through supportive leadership and offering real flexibility. And these newer models, like the 4-day week, are showing some real potential.
Right. So maybe a final thought for you, our listener, to take away. Thinking about your own work situation, are there maybe some small, practical steps you could take to create slightly better boundaries for yourself? Or perhaps some of the ideas we discussed about company culture or flexibility really resonated with your own experience?
Yeah, just something to reflect on. How might these ideas apply in your world? Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into burnout and the 9 to 5. We really hope it's helped you understand the topic better and maybe learn some useful English vocabulary and phrases too.
Yes, thank you. And we do encourage you to subscribe to Quick Speak the English podcast so you don't miss our future deep dives.
And please remember, you can find extra learning materials linked to today's discussion, things like vocabulary lists and some exercises, just by visiting the website that's mentioned in the description.